20% of every barrel of oil on Earth passes through a stretch of water 21 miles wide. Iran controls one side of it. And right now, the conversation happening in Washington, Moscow, and Tel Aviv is not about whether that choke point gets tested. It's about when, and whether anyone is truly prepared for what comes next. Let me tell you what is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Not the headlines, not the briefing room spin, but the documented operational reality that defense analysts and foreign policy institutions are quietly treating as the most dangerous pressure point in the world right now. The Strait of Hormuz is a geographic weapon. It is 21 miles at its narrowest, 2 shipping lanes, each barely 2 miles wide. Through those lanes flows approximately 17 million barrels of oil every single day, fuel for Japan, South Korea, India, Europe, and the United States. There is no pipeline large enough, no alternative route fast enough to replace that flow if it stops. A closure of even 72 hours sends oil markets into shock. A closure of 2 weeks restructures the global economy. Iran has known this for decades, and for decades, it has built its military doctrine around one central idea. It does not need to defeat the United States Navy in open battle. It only needs to make the cost of operating in the Gulf too high to sustain. That doctrine has a name: anti-access area denial. And in the past 3 years, Iran has developed the most sophisticated version of it ever deployed by a regional power in modern history. If this kind of analysis is what you came here for, the kind that deals in real strategy, not noise, subscribe now and hit the bell. This is the level we operate at, every single video. Here's what the U.S. military is genuinely contending with in the Gulf, and why no administration, Republican or Democrat, has found a clean answer. Iran's missile arsenal is not a Cold War relic. It is one of the largest and most diverse ballistic and cruise missile inventories held by any nation outside the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Conservative estimates from the International Institute for Strategic Studies put the active inventory at over 3,000 missiles across multiple platforms. The Fatah 110, the Shahab series, the Khaybar-Shikan, a ballistic missile that demonstrated precision strike capability in real-world use when Iran fired it into Kurdish-linked positions in northern Iraq in 2022, not in a test, in an actual operational strike. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has simultaneously built an asymmetric maritime force specifically designed to operate against large, slow-moving naval vessels in confined, shallow waters. Swarm tactics. Fast attack craft in mass formations. Anti-ship missiles fired from mobile coastal launchers that can be repositioned within hours. Underwater mines that are cheap to produce and catastrophically expensive to clear at scale. A 2020 U.S. Naval War College study, unclassified, publicly available, concluded that a defended Strait of Hormuz presented layered threat challenges that no current carrier strike group configuration could neutralize with zero risk. Zero. The report used that word explicitly. None of this means Iran wins a confrontation with the United States. American military power remains the most formidable in history. But winning a confrontation and controlling what that confrontation costs are entirely different questions. And it is the cost question, measured in ships, in aircraft, in personnel, in oil prices, in domestic political capital, that drives everything happening right now. The relationship between Russia and Iran has transformed since 2022 in ways that Western coverage has consistently underweighted. Before the war in Ukraine, Russia and Iran maintained a transactional partnership, cooperating where convenient, competing where interests diverged. Since 2022, that has changed structurally. Iran supplied Russia with Shahed series drones that Russian forces have used extensively in Ukraine. In exchange, analysts at the Royal United Services Institute in London, the Carnegie Endowment, and the Atlantic Council have all documented what they assess as a significant deepening of Russian technical assistance to Iran's aerospace and missile programs. This is not speculation. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned multiple entities for facilitating technology transfers. The UN panel of experts on Iran has reported components in recovered Iranian weapons that trace to Russian and Russian-aligned suppliers. The documentary evidence exists in the public domain. What does this mean strategically? It means that any American military planner designing an operation against Iranian missile infrastructure today has to account for a capability baseline that is materially higher than it was in 2020. It means that Russia has created for itself a form of strategic influence in the Gulf that costs it relatively little and constrains American options considerably. And it means that Putin has, without firing a single Russian round at a single American target, positioned Russia as a decisive variable in the most consequential regional security question in the world. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. Understanding Israel's strategic position requires understanding what qualitative military edge actually means, and what happens when the conditions sustaining it shift. For 50 years, American policy toward Israel has been built around a commitment that Israel will maintain a military advantage over any combination of regional adversaries sufficient to ensure its survival. American weapons systems, American intelligence sharing, American diplomatic cover at the UN, and above all, American military presence in the region as a deterrent backstop that no adversary can entirely ignore when calculating the cost of escalation. That architecture was designed for a threat environment that no longer fully exists. Hezbollah today, documented by the UN, by Israeli military assessments, and by independent analysts at the International Crisis Group, possesses an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 rockets and missiles. Not rifles, not personnel. Rockets and missiles ranging from short-range unguided munitions to precision-guided missiles capable of hitting specific coordinates inside Israeli cities. Iran has spent 20 years and billions of dollars building Hezbollah into a precision strike capability positioned on Israel's northern border. Iran's direct strike capability against Israel is no longer theoretical. In April 2024, Iran launched over 300 drones and missiles at Israel directly from Iranian soil, the first direct Iranian military attack on Israel in history. Israeli and American defenses intercepted the vast majority, but the significance was not the damage. The significance was the demonstration. Iran showed it could reach Israel. It showed it was willing to do so. And it showed that future strike packages could be designed to stress the same defensive systems that performed successfully in April under conditions calibrated to overwhelm rather than probe them. Israel's defense establishment knows this. The internal debate is not about whether the threat is real, it is about what options remain, how sustainable current alert postures are, and how much Israeli strategy depends on American engagement remaining active and credible in a moment when American domestic politics are pulling in complicated directions. The United States is not paralyzed. but it is constrained in ways that would have been difficult to predict a decade ago. American defense commitments are genuinely stretched across multiple theaters simultaneously. The support structure for Ukraine, the expanded posture in the Pacific in response to Chinese activity around Taiwan, the Gulf, Korea. These are not abstract lines on a map. They are carrier groups, munitions stockpiles, logistics chains, and personnel rotations that all draw from the same finite pool. The American defense industrial base is struggling to regenerate munitions at the rate current commitments consume them. This is documented. The Congressional Budget Office, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Reagan Institute's National Defense Survey have all flagged it. Key interceptor missiles, the SM-6, the Patriot PAC-3, are produced at rates that do not match what a sustained Gulf conflict would require. This is not a secret. It is a structural constraint that every adversary with access to open-source analysis has incorporated into their planning. Domestically, American public appetite for another major Middle East military commitment is measurably low. Polling from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs consistently shows a population that wants American power engaged in the world, but is deeply skeptical of large-scale military intervention in the Gulf. That political reality does not determine policy, but it does shape the boundaries within which any administration can operate. The question American strategists are working through is not whether the United States can project power in the Gulf. It can. The question is at what cost, for how long, and whether the domestic and international political coalition required to sustain that projection remains intact in a crisis that escalates beyond the deterrence phase. There are no clean answers. There are only choices between different categories of difficulty, and the recognition that the window in which deterrence is cheaper than conflict is exactly the window currently in play. What is genuinely new about the current moment is not any single event. It is the convergence of shifts that individually looked manageable, but together are reshaping the regional order faster than Western policy frameworks are adjusting. China has become the dominant trading partner for Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran simultaneously. The petro-yuan, oil sales settled in Chinese currency, is no longer theoretical. Saudi Aramco has completed yuan-denominated oil trades. The financial architecture that has tied Gulf energy exports to the dollar for 50 years is loosening at the margins, and those margins are widening. The Gulf Arab states are not abandoning the American security relationship. They are hedging it. Saudi Arabia restored diplomatic relations with Iran in 2023 through Chinese mediation, a deal that would have been structurally impossible 5 years earlier. The UAE has deepened defense cooperation with the United States while simultaneously expanding trade and technology partnerships with China and maintaining open diplomatic channels with Russia. These are not contradictions. They are the strategy of states that have concluded they can no longer afford to be exclusively positioned in one geopolitical camp when the cost of that exclusivity is rising and the alternatives are becoming more credible. The Middle East that is forming is not the Middle East of American organizational primacy. It is a contested, multipolar space where American influence remains significant but is no longer the gravitational center around which everything else orbits. That transition is not complete. It may not be irreversible, but it is real, it is documented, and it is accelerating. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of all of it, a geographic fact that no political transition, no diplomatic realignment, and no technological development has yet made irrelevant. Here is what I want you to take from this. The Strait of Hormuz is not a crisis waiting to happen. It is a permanent pressure point, one that every major power on Earth has to factor into its calculations every day. The question is not whether it gets tested. Versions of it are tested constantly. In Iranian naval exercises, in Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, in every arms transfer that changes the capability balance in the Gulf. The question that matters is whether the architecture of deterrence, the combination of American military presence, alliance credibility, economic interdependence, and diplomatic engagement remains sufficiently robust to keep the cost of escalation above the threshold any actor is willing to pay. Right now, that architecture is under more simultaneous strain than at any point since the 1980s tanker wars. Not because any single actor has decided to blow it up, but because the accumulation of decisions, miscalculations, capability shifts, and geopolitical realignments has narrowed the margin for error in ways that are not yet reflected in most public discourse. The analysts who are taking this seriously are not predicting war. They are identifying the conditions under which miscalculation becomes more likely. And the first step toward better outcomes is accurate understanding of where we actually are, not where we wish we were, and not where last decade's frameworks assumed we'd be. That is what this channel exists to provide. So here is what I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me, do you think American deterrence in the Gulf is still credible? Or has the strategic environment shifted to a point where the calculus for adversaries has fundamentally changed? Give me your honest assessment. The most substantive responses get featured in the follow-up. If this analysis delivered the depth you came here for, share this with one person who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the world. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and hit the notification bell, because the next video in this series covers what a real Hormuz closure scenario looks like, what it does to global oil markets in the first 14 days, and which economies face existential exposure. That one drops in 72 hours.